This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. A slaughter today in Louisville, Kentucky, written in blood and bullets. The toll, at least 8 dead, 13 wounded, 5 of them critically. The shooter, a worker on disability, quote, looking for bosses. The weapons, an AK-47 and a pistol. Frank Courier reports.
A reign of terror inside a Louisville printing plant. And moments later, a parade of innocent victims.
No! What hospital are we going to?
A disgruntled worker armed with an assault rifle had just opened fire on fellow employees before he took his own life.
I don't think he saw me or I wouldn't be standing here.
I just started crying and shaking.
You know, and everybody started running. When I opened the door, there were 3 or 4 guys laying on the floor.
The dead and the wounded were found on 3 floors of the plant. Witnesses say the gunman was running and shooting randomly in all directions.
It looks like a battle zone inside the Standing Gravure building with the blood and the people who have just gone through this terrible experience.
He had that rifle in his hand. He told me, he said, get away from me, John. I said, get away now.
Police identify the killer as 47-year-old Joseph Westbecker, who was carrying a 9mm handgun and an AK-47 automatic assault weapon.
Fellow workers say Westbecker was a press operator. He'd been employed at the company at least 15 years, was on long-term disability, suffering, they say, from severe emotional problems.
He'd been talking about guns and shooting people up and sold her a Fortune magazine and stuff like that for a year or 2. He was paranoid, you know, he thought everybody had it in for him.
The shooting rampage sparked renewed and impassioned pleas in Washington for a ban on assault rifles.
How many more senseless slaughters must we endure before we limit a madman's access to assault weapons?
It's a question that'll be asked again and again by the families and friends of today's victims in yet another senseless slaughter without a motive. Frank Courier, CBS News, Louisville.
For the first time, the U.S. Air Force took a fully operational MX nuclear missile that was on strategic alert out of its silo in Wyoming, removed the warheads, and test-fired it. It didn't work. 3 minutes into the MX flight, about 100 miles downrange from the launch site at California's Vandenberg Air Force Base, the Air Force detected problems and blew up the missile. No word yet on exactly what the problem was. The Exxon Corporation ends what it calls its summer cleanup of Alaska's Prince William Sound this week. The action comes just 25 weeks after the tanker Exxon Valdez split open on a reef and spilled almost 11 million gallons of crude oil into wilderness waters. How successful was the cleanup? John Blackstone looked into that.
The winter storms are already blowing in off the Gulf of Alaska. Exxon's cleanup workers have become an army in retreat. On the docks in Valdez, the pullout goes on around the clock. Thousands of pieces of equipment are being packed away for the winter, and maybe for good. Out on the beaches that were once thick with oil, Exxon is declaring victory.
I can't tell you how good it makes you feel to see this beach. You know, when you know what this beach looked like when we started, and you see what it looks like now, you just really got to feel good.
But most beaches are not so clean, and not everyone working for Exxon feels so good.
You dig down in it, and it's still there. We're only scratching the surface out here.
The way Exxon figures it, less than 2 miles of shoreline still needed work this past week. Even the company doesn't call the beaches clean, it calls them treated.
We have fixed these beaches so that they are now safe for wildlife, for animals, for birds.
State officials say there's no evidence the beaches are safe.
You can see it's pretty heavily mucked up with oil.
Rick Guston's job is to discover the truth about what's happening in the salmon streams of Prince William Sound.
Sometimes you feel like crying, sometimes you want to put your fist through a wall or somebody's face, but that isn't going to do any good.
This is spawning season. Nature pushes the salmon to lay their eggs before they die. The fish have returned home in spite of the oil. But what will happen to the next generation is one of the long-term uncertainties. The short-term devastation is well documented.
This particular one was found in Herring Bay, it says, on April the 6th.
All 34,000 dead birds are being kept frozen in cold storage as evidence.
We're holding it all for the attorneys and the courts to decide what they want to do.
Dead and dying birds were still being found at the rate of almost 100 a day last week. Exxon says the deaths are natural, not caused by oil. Scientists aren't sure.
We're seeing a bird that is suffering from anemia, which could be a result of starvation or possibly a result of ingesting oil-contaminated food.
Sea otters have been the wildlife stars of the cleanup. Most have been released, but 13 young ones, orphans raised by the rescuers, could not survive in the wild. They'll go to zoos. Here on the Kenai Peninsula, more than 100 miles from Prince William Sound, there are places that remain thick in oil. Isolated coves that have never been reached by Exxon cleanup crews. A small band of determined volunteers has chosen this place to make a point.
It's still going on, and you can't just stomp it into the ground.
They want to show that Exxon's cleanup could go on for at least another month.
I'm out here because this is my home. This is where I live. And there's lots of work to be done here.
Exxon believes the approaching winter storms will wash away most of the remaining oil. No one will know for sure until spring. Alaskans are facing their most difficult season with a full measure of uncertainty. John Blackstone, CBS News, Mars Cove, Alaska.
Still to come on the CBS Evening News, correspondent Bob Faw on young criminals making punishment fit their age and why some people call it mollycoddling in one nation under siege.
Dear Malox, my daughter's dates give me Malox moments.
Hey, I'm here!
Last night was a real doozy. What a Malox moment. My dinner turned to acid. Good thing Extra Strength Malox Plus is so strong. My doctor recommended it.
Nearly 1,000 more East Germans fled across the Hungarian border to the west today, bringing the total to more than 13,000 in this week's exodus. East Germany will mark its 40th anniversary next month, and the state-controlled press reported today that Mikhail Gorbachev has accepted an invitation to join the festivities in East Berlin. That could be a psychological boost for the East German leaders, but as Tom Fenton reports tonight, they need more than that.
The East German government seems paralyzed. Rumors are sweeping East Berlin that party leader Erich Honecker is dying. All that is certain is that the man who has ruled this country with an iron hand for 18 years hasn't been seen in public for weeks. No action has been taken to stem the mass exodus of unhappy citizens. And ironically, the Hungarian travel office here has been left open. East Germans wanting to flee can still book a trip to Hungary and freedom. This hardline communist state is caught in a changing East European environment. The Warsaw Pact is cracking. Poland next door has a new non-communist government, and now there's the problem with Hungary. Hungarian officials have been meeting here with East Germans, but the talks haven't been going well. The Hungarians refuse to close down their border. Meanwhile, East Germans continue to seek refuge in West German embassies throughout Eastern Europe. In Prague, they have even been jumping over the embassy fence. Most of those fleeing this police state are young, skilled, and highly motivated, the sort no country can afford to lose. There was already an acute labor shortage. This new restaurant in East Berlin has just closed because the owner fled west. Even the head of the famed Meissen porcelain company recently jumped ship. Everyone complains.
There are a lot of problems, of course, in our country.
But public dissent is rare, and even small demonstrations are instantly repressed by the massive police apparatus. Those left behind are increasingly bitter. A taxi driver pointed to the shoddy cars that East Germans wait 16 years to buy and said this country is like a giant monkey cage. People come here to laugh at us. Tom Fenton, CBS News, East Berlin.
President Bush said today the United States will double its food aid to Poland over the next year. Under pressure to help the new non-communist government, President Bush pledged an additional $50 million worth of surplus meat, grain, and butter. The president said it's meant to help the Polish people get through a hard winter and to help the government save a farm economy that's been wrecked under communist rule. Bert Quint has a report from down on the farm in Poland.
Jerzy Sur sold just a few pigs today. Like many Polish farmers, he's holding out for a better price. And that's one reason Poland's butcher shops are just about empty. So, Sur sells just enough to keep his farm going. Some farmers manage to sell food privately, for a city dweller's table, for a restaurant, or for resale on the open market at nearly twice the official price, which few Poles can afford.
Why is it in a country like Poland that is so fertile and so many good animals, why is there a shortage of food?
It just disappears.
It's an economy of thieves.
Shure says state interference, inefficiency, and corruption have ruined Polish agriculture. For 4 decades, the communists have built up unprofitable heavy industry while neglecting the farms. Very little agricultural machinery is manufactured, and most of that, along with fertilizer and fodder, goes to the big state farms, even though they produce much less than the tiny private ones. 3 of every 4 private farmers don't even have a tractor. Shure got the right to buy his from a state-owned factory by delivering 25,000 quarts of milk to the state, and then he had to pay a bribe as well. No wonder the young have abandoned the countryside, and no wonder the nation is not fed properly. The man Solidarity made prime minister, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, says it's up to the farmers to save Poland. But first, Solidarity must save the farmers by ripping apart the communist system and putting in a new one that works. This takes time, and for Poland, time has just about run out. Bert Quint, CBS News, Leniska, Poland.
F.W. de Klerk was formally elected president of South Africa today, and he promised to bring the voteless black majority into the political system as soon as possible. De Klerk pledged that during his 5-year term, quote, "We are going to reach the stage where all South Africans, in a just and equitable manner, become part of all the decision-making processes in South Africa," unquote. Several officials of Housing and Urban Development Secretary Samuel Pierce have indicated that Pierce must answer more questions about the investigation concerning his tenure at HUD. Today, Pierce suddenly canceled scheduled testimony to Congress on Friday. The reason he gave was not enough time to prepare. Congress is investigating, among other things, how several former HUD officials and well-connected Republicans in the Reagan years made big money off what are called consulting contracts on housing programs intended for the poor. A Seattle-based research team today announced it has developed a live, genetically engineered vaccine that protects macaque monkeys against infection by an AIDS-causing retrovirus. Those findings have no immediate implication for preventing AIDS among humans, but they could provide a model for building a human vaccine. Meanwhile, AIDS treatment costs spiral. Mark Phillips reports.
Another 4 hours gone in the life of Sam and Stasi. The time between AZT doses is how Sam's life is measured these days. He has the AIDS virus, although the main symptoms of the disease have yet to appear. They will. His doctor says he has about 6 months to live.
This has got to stop, that's all.
Sam's fight is not just for survival, it's also a battle to pay for that fight. And a new report out tonight shows Sam's case is typical. In the race to keep AIDS patients alive, science is way ahead of the country's willingness to pay. A month's supply of AZT costs $700, more than $8,000 a year for those who survive that long. Sam has applied to Social Security for help. He's waiting for a reply.
They're playing this waiting game. I don't have the time to wait.
Researchers say there are 1 million people in the U.S. who have the AIDS virus. If all the people who need it were given AZT, the national bill would be $5 billion a year.
We can't sit around for another year or two figuring out how we're going to provide these services. We must begin immediately.
AIDS action groups have begun to act, protesting on Wall Street today, accusing the drug industry of profiteering from AZT. The protesters have a sympathetic ear in Washington.
They are making a substantial profit, and we don't deny that to them, but they're now at the point where they're gouging people by charging the kind of prices that they have been charging.
Gouging people like Sam and Stasi, who must prove himself disabled and destitute enough to qualify for federal help.
Catch-22 is until I'm on my deathbed, Social Security's not going to pay any of my bills or give me any medication.
It's a catch-22 in which Sam and Stasi and a million others are caught. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Washington.
Today, the House Ways and Means Committee voted 19-17 to cut the capital gains tax. 6 Democrats on the committee were among those voting yes, but final congressional approval is still far from certain. President Bush has been pushing for a cut in the capital gains tax, saying it will boost the economy. Opponents, including congressional Democratic leaders, say this amounts simply and purely to a tax break for the wealthiest Americans. study released today by the Amateur Athletic Union on the physical fitness of American youth is enough to take your breath away. More than 30 years after President Eisenhower established a council on youth fitness, the latest survey indicates we still aren't shaping up. Terrence Smith has our report.
There may be less physical fitness here than meets the eye. The most comprehensive fitness study ever, involving students in 42,000 schools over the last 10 years, concludes that America's kids are going soft.
American children are becoming more sedentary. When you become more sedentary, you become less fit.
The study found that among kids from 6 to 17, the trends are ominous. Their endurance levels are down, their overall physical performance has slipped, their body weight is up. The results only confirm what high school phys ed teachers already know.
I see them being less physical fit now than they were 10 years ago.
Why this downward slide? Experts cite everything from television to video games to the fact that kids who used to walk to school now are often bused for safety reasons.
We are essentially cave age, Stone Age bodies attempting to cope with a space age culture.
Even the kids admit that the emphasis is no longer on the playing field.
The more popular people nowadays, they want to be popular, they want to like hang around, be lazy, and eat junk around McDonald's and stuff like that.
I try to take as few gym classes as I can because I spend most of my time in academics, you know.
It's not an either-or problem. I get very upset when people say, well, we can either have reading or we can have fitness. I mean, that's nonsense.
The recommended solutions? More intensive and sustained physical education programs, less fat in the school diet, and a recognition that fitness makes for a happier, better adjusted kid. Terrence Smith, CBS News, Washington.
Go get him.
Word tonight that entertainer Sammy Davis Jr. has throat cancer and will begin radiation therapy next week. His spokesman said the cancer was discovered during the 63-year-old Davis's annual medical checkup. Some 200 miles east of Charleston, South Carolina, explorers today are hauling up gold bars and coins reportedly worth up to $1 billion. The booty comes from the SS Central America, a paddle wheel steamer carrying passengers from San Francisco to New York when it sank during a hurricane in September 1857. The gold came from the mint and from passengers returning with gold rush treasure. The old ship was discovered 2 years ago by a private organization. As we continue CBS News special coverage of crack and other drugs, our series under the general heading, One Nation Under Siege, a report tonight on one of the most troubling aspects of the drug plague. Children not old enough to buy a drink, buying drugs, selling drugs, committing vicious and violent crimes over drugs and on drugs. Correspondent Bob Faw has been investigating juvenile criminals and juvenile justice in a crime wave fueled by crack.
All the way up against the wall.
Another busy night for another metropolitan police department. It could be any city.
We're on the rails, all up against the wall.
I just heard pow, pow, pow.
This time it's Baltimore on the 11 o'clock news.
Another night, another shooting. Police are investigating.
The 15-year-old charged with this murder is part of a juvenile crime wave. From 1983 to 1987, according to FBI figures, the number of juveniles arrested for murder jumped 22%. For aggravated assault, up almost 19%. For rape, nearly 15% higher.
We have some 13, 14, 15-year-old hardcore, very, very dangerous criminals. People who would kill you without any hesitation.
Because of public outrage, most states are cracking down on teenage criminals with harsher penalties, mandatory sentences. But 17 states as diverse as Maryland and Utah are trying a new approach, locking a few of the hardest core kids in institutions and putting the rest, even those who have committed serious crimes, into community-based programs where they are sent to class and to counseling.
What do I want in my own life? What do I want to get out of life?
You have a lot more freedom, first of all, They trust you, and it's not like there's no locked doors, no fixed screens on the window.
So in Maryland, kids convicted of car theft and assault are taught how to play floor hockey. In Utah, they are taught how to fish. Officials say this sort of activity teaches responsibility.
You're tangled. You're tangled.
Being harsh doesn't necessarily work. The worst investment you can make in dealing with a juvenile delinquent is an institution. It's the most costly and the least effective.
Convicted robber Wayne Torgeson, now 16, says society helped itself when it gave him a second chance rather than locking him up.
I think that I'd be locked up or just getting out, and I'd feel a lot of hatred towards society.
But critics grumble that so-called punishment like this hardly fits the crime, that teenage criminals are being mollycoddled. Recent escapes by inmates at one Maryland institution frightened a local community. Another juvenile offender here on a weekend pass has been charged with murder.
I think it's a charade and it's a revolving door. The kids come in, they put on their performance, they go home, they come back again.
These kids out here today are quite street smart. They know how the system works, they know what they can get away with. We're going to have more problems down the road.
If we're not tougher with kids.
Yes, sir.
And the criticism is coming not just from cops on the beat, it's even coming from liberal politicians.
We have really been irresponsible in our treatment of youthful offenders by being too lenient on it, as far as I'm concerned. You can't just look the other way and think that, that hand-holding is going to work for these kids.
The jury is still out on Maryland's new program, which state officials insist is cheaper and which works better than the old way of locking kids up in institutions. Now they say the number of kids funneled through the system again and again has been drastically reduced.
I think it's better. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it's better.
I don't think we're coddling kids. We're not saying because we're giving you good specialized treatment, we're giving you the discipline that you need, that we're coddling them. I think just the opposite. I think there's a chance to save a lot of youngsters.
They haven't grown up yet, and both sides in the debate generally agree the law should treat juveniles differently than adults. The question, especially when teenagers commit vicious crimes, is how much an angry public is willing to remember that they're still kids. Bob Fall, CBS News, Baltimore.
And that's part of our world tonight. We'll be back on the air very soon now with a special broadcast of 48 Hours, Return to Crack Street. We hope you'll watch this new look at the world of crack and what can be done about the growing menace. Join us as we start a new season of 48 Hours tonight at 8, 7 Central Time. Until then, Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. See you again soon.
What will the next 48 hours be like? Return to Crack Street, a special season premiere tonight.
This is CBS.